I am 26 years old, a woman who until yesterday believed she was starting the most beautiful chapter of her life. My husband, Mark, and I had just exchanged vows. The ceremony was perfect. The sun was shining. Our families were smiling. I thought everything was exactly as it should be. The reception was held in a beautiful old hall with high ceilings and wooden floors. Laughter echoed off the walls. I felt a sense of peace I had not felt in a long time. The stress of planning was over. Now it was time to celebrate. I held Mark's hand, and his smile felt like a promise of a shared future, of partnership, of love. I believed in that promise with every part of my being. The DJ's voice cut through the music and chatter. It was a cheerful, booming sound that made everyone turn toward the small stage he had set up in the corner. He was a man with a wide smile and a microphone held close to his lips. He said, "All right, everyone, we are going to slow things down for a moment." A murmur of anticipation went through the crowd. I squeezed Mark's hand, assuming it was time for our first dance as a married couple. I had been looking forward to that moment for months. We had practiced in our living room, stumbling over each other's feet and laughing until we could not breathe. It was one of my fondest memories. But the DJ said something different. He said, "We have a very special request for the next dance. This one is dedicated to the groom's one true love." My heart fluttered. I thought Mark had planned a surprise for me. I looked at him, my eyes wide with love and happiness. He was still smiling, but his eyes darted away from mine for just a second. It was a tiny movement, almost nothing, but it planted a small seed of unease in my chest. I dismissed it quickly. I was just being nervous. This was our day. Nothing could spoil it. Then a chair scraped against the floor. I looked over at the table where Mark's family was sitting. His sister Chloe was standing up. She was a year older than Mark, a woman who always seemed to carry a spotlight with her. She was beautiful, with the same dark hair and bright eyes as her brother, but her smile never quite reached them. She smoothed down the front of her expensive dress. She looked directly at the dance floor, a confident, almost challenging expression on her face. She took a step forward, and then another. She was walking toward the center of the dance floor, where a single spotlight now shone. My smile froze on my face. The room seemed to fall silent, though I could still hear the low hum of the music starting. It was a slow, romantic song, a song meant for lovers. I looked at Mark, my mind struggling to understand what was happening. He was not looking at me. He was watching his sister with an unreadable expression. My hand, still in his, suddenly felt cold and heavy. Chloe reached the center of the dance floor and turned. She looked at Mark, and the smile she gave him was one of pure possession. It was a smile that said, "He is mine." I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. I could feel their pity, their confusion, their morbid curiosity. My face grew hot with a shame so intense it felt like a physical blow. This was my wedding, my reception. And my sister-in-law had just declared herself my husband's one true love in front of everyone we knew. The DJ, finally sensing the suffocating awkwardness in the room, fumbled with his equipment. The music faltered and then stopped. Chloe stood alone in the spotlight, her smirk unwavering. And I stood next to my new husband, feeling smaller and more alone than I ever had in my entire life. He let go of my hand. He took a step toward her, his mouth opening as if to say something, to explain, to fix it. But he did not. He just stood there, caught between his sister and his wife, and in his hesitation, I found my answer. I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The silence in the hall was deafening. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. Every tick of the clock on the wall sounded like a drumbeat marking my humiliation. Chloe finally seemed to realize that no one was joining her. Her smirk wavered for a fraction of a second. She glanced at her mother, Helen, who gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a look of encouragement, a look of approval. My blood ran cold. This was not a spontaneous, foolish act. This was planned. It was a performance, and I was the intended audience of one. Mark finally cleared his throat. He turned to me, his face a mask of strained nonchalance. He said, "It is just a joke, Sarah. Chloe is just messing around. You know how she is." His voice was a low whisper, meant only for me, but the excuse felt loud and hollow. A joke. He thought this was a joke. I looked from his face to his sister, who was now slowly walking back to her table, her head held high as if she had just won a great victory. My own family was staring, my mother's face pale with shock and my father's jaw set in a tight, angry line. I could not find my voice. The words were stuck in my throat, choked by a rising tide of anger and disbelief. A joke. A public declaration of love for my husband on our wedding day was a joke. I pulled my hand away from his. The contact felt wrong, like touching a stranger. I needed to get away. I needed to breathe air that was not thick with betrayal. I turned and walked away from him, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I did not go to my family. I did not want them to see the tears welling up in my eyes. I walked toward the back of the hall, toward the doors that led to a small, empty patio. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. The sounds of the reception faded behind me, replaced by the quiet chirping of crickets. I leaned against the brick wall, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The beautiful white dress I was wearing suddenly felt like a costume. The carefully styled hair, the makeup, the delicate veil I had removed earlier, it all felt like a lie. I had been playing the part of a happy bride, completely unaware that I was the fool in a play written by my new family. The patio door opened again. It was Mark. He walked toward me slowly, his hands in his pockets. He stopped a few feet away, not daring to touch me. He said, "Sarah, please come back inside. People are starting to wonder where you are." His voice was calm, too calm. It was the voice he used when he was trying to manage a situation, not the voice of a husband comforting his distraught wife. I looked at him, really looked at him, the man I had married just hours ago. I said, "Did you know she was going to do that?" My voice was quiet, but it was steady. I would not let him see me fall apart. He shook his head. He said, "Of course not. I was as surprised as you were. It was just Chloe being dramatic. That is her way." I said, "Her way of what, Mark?" "Her way of humiliating me? Her way of making it clear that she comes first, even on our wedding day?" He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. It was a sound I was beginning to know well. It was the sound he made when he did not want to deal with something. He said, "You are making this into a much bigger deal than it is. It was a stupid prank. It is over now. Let us go back inside and enjoy our party." He did not get it. Or maybe he did, and he just did not care. I felt a profound sense of clarity in that moment. This was not just about a tasteless joke. This was about a fundamental lack of respect. It was about a family dynamic that was so twisted and unhealthy that they thought this was acceptable behavior. And my husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, was a willing participant in his own silence. He was an enabler. I said, "No, I do not think I can go back in there right now." He took a step closer. He said, "Sarah, do not do this. Do not ruin our wedding night over something so small." Small. He called it small. The word echoed in my mind. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the weakness behind his charming smile. He was afraid of his sister. He was afraid of his mother. And he was willing to sacrifice my feelings to keep the peace with them. I realized then that this was not the first battle I would have to fight. It was just the opening shot in a long war. And I had to decide if I was willing to fight it. I said, "I need some time alone, Mark. Please, just go back inside and tell everyone I am not feeling well." He hesitated, clearly torn. He wanted to push, to persuade me to come back and pretend everything was fine. But he must have seen something in my eyes. a hardness that was not there before. He nodded slowly. He said, "All right, but do not be long." He turned and walked back into the hall, leaving me alone in the darkness. I watched him go, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that nothing would ever be the same again. My wedding night was already ruined. Now I had to figure out if my marriage was ruined too. I stayed on that patio for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of the party I was supposed to be the center of. I could hear the music start up again, a fast, upbeat song. I imagined people dancing, laughing, drinking champagne, completely oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Or maybe they were not oblivious. Maybe they were whispering about it, speculating, feeling sorry for the poor bride who had been so thoroughly upstaged. The thought made my skin crawl. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Eventually, the door opened again. This time, it was not Mark. It was my best friend, Jessica. She had been my maid of honor. She walked over and stood beside me, not saying a word for a full minute. She just stood there, a silent, solid presence. It was exactly what I needed. Finally, she said, "Are you okay?" Her voice was soft with concern. I shook my head, unable to speak. A single tear escaped and traced a cold path down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction. Jessica put an arm around my shoulders. She said, "What she did was unbelievable. I have never seen anything like it." And Helen just sat there and smiled. It was sick. I leaned into her, grateful for her validation. I said, "Mark called it a joke. He said I am overreacting." Jessica made a disgusted sound. She said, "Of course he did. He has been letting Chloe and his mother walk all over him his entire life. Why would today be any different?" Her words were harsh, but they were true. I had seen hints of it during our courtship. I had seen how Chloe's moods could dictate an entire family dinner. I had seen how Helen's passive-aggressive comments could make Mark bend over backward to please her. I had seen it, but I had chosen to ignore it. I had believed that our love would be different. I had believed that once we were married, I would be his priority. I had been so naive. I said, "What do I do, Jess? How do I go back in there and face them?" She squeezed my shoulder. She said, "You do not have to do anything you do not want to do. If you want to leave, I will drive you home right now. We can pack your bags and go to my place." The offer was tempting. So incredibly tempting. Just to run away from it all. To escape the suffocating atmosphere of that party and the weight of all those staring eyes. But then I thought about Chloe's smug face. I thought about Helen's quiet approval. I thought about Mark's weak excuses. If I ran, they would win. They would paint me as the hysterical, oversensitive bride who could not take a joke. They would twist the story until I was the villain. I could not let that happen. I stood up straighter, pulling away from Jessica's comforting embrace. A new feeling was starting to replace the hurt and humiliation. It was a cold, hard anger. It was a quiet resolve. They had wanted to make a point. They had wanted to show me my place. Fine. I would show them theirs. I said, "No, I am not leaving. This is my wedding. I paid for half of it. I am not going to let them chase me away." Jessica looked at me, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. She said, "Okay, what is the plan?" I took a deep breath. I said, "The plan is to go back in there and act like nothing happened. I am going to smile and dance and talk to my guests. I am going to be the perfect, happy bride. I will not give them the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I will not let them ruin this night for my family and friends who came here to celebrate with us." It was the hardest thing I could imagine doing, but I knew it was the right thing. It was the first move in a game I did not even know I was playing. They had shown their hand. Now it was my turn to play mine. And I would play it very, very carefully. I said, but I need you to do something for me. Jessica nodded. She said, anything. I said, watch them. Watch Chloe and Helen. Listen to what they say. I need to know what they are planning. Mark mentioned a honeymoon surprise from her. After this, I do not trust that it is anything good. A dark look crossed Jessica's face. She said, you got it. I will be your eyes and ears. I gave her a small, grateful smile. I said, thank you. Together, we walked back toward the door. I paused with my hand on the handle, taking one last fortifying breath. I smoothed down my dress and forced a smile onto my face. It felt stiff and unnatural, but in the dim light of the patio, I hoped it would look real. I was no longer just a bride. I was a soldier going into battle. I opened the door and walked back into the reception, ready to face my enemy. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I danced with my father, who held me tight and whispered in my ear that he was proud of me. I talked to my aunts and uncles, who told me I looked beautiful. I smiled for pictures, my arm linked through Mark's, my body rigid with the effort of pretending. He tried to act as if everything was normal. He pulled me close on the dance floor. He kissed my cheek for the camera. He whispered jokes in my ear. But I could feel the distance between us. It was a chasm that had opened up on that patio, and I did not know if it could ever be closed. I avoided Chloe and Helen as much as possible, but I could feel their eyes on me. I saw them huddled together in a corner, whispering and laughing. Every time their laughter rang out, I felt a fresh wave of anger. They were enjoying this. They were reveling in my discomfort. Jessica stayed true to her word. I saw her casually linger near their table, pretending to talk to someone else while she listened in. She would catch my eye from across the room and give me a subtle nod, letting me know she was on the job. The next trial came during the gift opening. It was a tradition in my family to open a few gifts at the reception, especially from close family. We sat in 2 chairs at the front of the room while the best man and maid of honor brought us presents. It was all very lovely. We received a beautiful set of crystal glasses from my parents, a generous check from Mark's grandparents, a handmade quilt from my favorite aunt. Then, Jessica brought over a large flat box wrapped in silver paper. She placed it in my lap, her expression grim. The tag read, "To Mark and his bride, from Chloe." Mark took the box from me, his movements a little too quick, a little too eager. He said, "Oh, I wonder what this is. Chloe always gives the most thoughtful gifts." His voice was loud, performative. He was trying to smooth things over, to create a narrative of a loving, quirky sister. I just sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, and waited. He tore off the paper to reveal a large, leather-bound photo album. On the cover, embossed in gold letters, were the words, "Mark's first love." My breath caught in my throat. It was another public dig, another calculated move to undermine and humiliate me. Mark opened the album. The first page was a picture of him as a baby, being held by a young Chloe. The caption underneath read, "I loved you first." He flipped through the pages, showing them to the crowd. Page after page of pictures of him and Chloe. Chloe teaching him how to ride a bike. Chloe and him at his high school graduation. Chloe and him on a family vacation, their arms around each other. There were no pictures of me. There were no pictures of him with anyone else. It was a shrine to their relationship, a carefully curated history that excluded me entirely. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks again. This was worse than the dance. This was a tangible, permanent declaration. It was a statement that I was an outsider, an intruder in their sacred bond. I looked at Mark, expecting to see some sign of embarrassment or anger on my behalf. But he was just smiling, a nostalgic, sentimental look on his face. He said, "Wow, Chloe, this is amazing. Thank you." He looked at me, his smile faltering slightly as he saw my stony expression. He said, "Is not this great, Sarah? All these old memories." I could not speak. I just stared at the album in his hands. It felt like a weapon, and he was holding it as if it were a precious treasure. The room was quiet again. The guests did not know how to react. My family looked furious. Mark's family, however, was beaming. Helen looked like the proudest mother in the world. I finally found my voice. It was cold and quiet. I said, "It is certainly a gift I will never forget." The double meaning was lost on Mark, but not on Chloe. I saw her from across the room. She was watching me, her eyes glittering with triumph. She had landed another direct hit, and she knew it. I stood up abruptly. I said, "I think I need some air." I did not wait for a response. I walked out of the hall for the second time that night, the sound of polite, confused applause following me out the door. This time I did not stop at the patio. I kept walking. I went to the small bridal suite that the venue had provided for me to get ready in. I closed the door behind me and finally let the tears come. They were hot, angry tears. Tears of frustration and helplessness. I had tried to be strong. I had tried to rise above it. But they were relentless. They would not stop until they had completely broken me. I sank onto the small sofa in the corner of the room, my beautiful dress pooling around me. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe I should just leave. What kind of marriage could this possibly be? A marriage where my husband consistently chose his sister's feelings over mine? A marriage where I would always be second best? A marriage where I would have to constantly fight for my place? My phone buzzed on the small table next to the sofa. It was a text from Jessica. It read, "Are you okay? I am so sorry. I tried to warn you by my expression." I typed back, "I am in the bridal suite. I do not know what to do." A minute later, she replied, "Stay there. I am coming, and I have something to tell you." I put the phone down, my heart pounding. What else could there possibly be? What other fresh hell was waiting for me on my wedding night? I waited, my mind racing. I thought about the first time I met Chloe. She had been charming, friendly, welcoming. She had told me how happy she was that Mark had finally found someone who made him happy. I had believed her. I had been so eager to be liked, so desperate to fit into his family. I saw now that it had all been an act. A long, elaborate performance designed to lull me into a false sense of security. The door opened and Jessica slipped inside, closing it quietly behind her. Her face was pale. She came and sat next to me on the sofa. She took my hand. She said, "I overheard them, Chloe and Helen, when you left the room after the photo album." I held my breath. I said, "What did they say?" Jessica took a deep breath. She said, "Helen was congratulating her. She said, 'That will put her in her place.'" And Chloe laughed. She said, "Just wait for the honeymoon surprise. She will really know her place then." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and menacing. A honeymoon surprise. The phrase that had seemed strange before now sounded sinister. This was not just about petty jealousy anymore. This was a coordinated campaign of psychological warfare. They were actively plotting to make me miserable, to assert their dominance, to ensure I understood that I was nothing more than a temporary guest in their family. I looked at Jessica, my eyes wide. I said, "What do you think they are planning?" She shook her head. She said, "I do not know, but we have to find out. Sarah, this is serious. These people are not just rude. They are malicious." She was right. The last remnants of my hope for a happy, peaceful marriage crumbled into dust. This was my new reality. A husband who would not defend me and a family that was actively working against me. The despair I had felt just moments before began to curdle into something else. It was a cold, hard resolve. I had been hurt. I had been humiliated. But I would not be broken. I stood up and walked over to the mirror. I looked at my reflection. My makeup was smudged from the tears. My eyes were red. I looked like a victim. I did not want to be a victim. I took a tissue and carefully wiped away the tear tracks. I reapplied my lipstick. I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. I turned back to Jessica. I said, "You are right. We do have to find out. And we have to do it before we leave for the honeymoon in 2 days." A slow smile spread across Jessica's face. She said, "That is the Sarah I know. What is the plan?" I looked at my phone, which was still on the table. An idea began to form in my mind. It was risky. It was underhanded. But they had left me with no other choice. They had declared war. It was time for me to start fighting back. I said, "Mark left his phone in the suite earlier when he was getting something from his bag. He always uses the same simple passcode. I think it is time I took a look." Jessica's eyebrows shot up. She said, "Are you sure you want to do that? That is a big step." I nodded. I said, "They have already taken 100 big steps. They have crossed lines I did not even know existed. I am done playing fair." I picked up Mark's phone. My hand was shaking, but my purpose was firm. The game had changed, and I was going to find out the rules, one way or another. Mark's phone felt heavy in my hand, like a forbidden object. For a moment, I hesitated. Snooping through my husband's phone on our wedding night felt like a terrible breach of trust. But then I remembered Chloe's triumphant smirk and Helen's approving nod. They had breached my trust first. They had shattered it into a million pieces. This was not about suspicion anymore. This was about self-preservation. I swiped the screen open and entered the passcode. It was our anniversary date. The irony was not lost on me. The screen lit up, revealing his home screen. A picture of the two of us smiling on a beach looked back at me. It was a photo from our last vacation, a time when I had felt so secure, so loved. It felt like a lifetime ago. My fingers trembled as I opened his messages. Jessica stood beside me, a silent watchguard. I scrolled down, my heart pounding in my chest. I found the message thread with Chloe. It was long, filled with casual chatter and inside jokes. I scrolled up, looking for anything related to the wedding, to the honeymoon. My eyes landed on a message from Chloe sent the day before. It read, "Are you ready for tomorrow? Do not forget the plan. We have to make sure she understands the pecking order from day one." Mark's reply was a single, infuriating message. I know. Just try not to be too harsh. I do have to live with her." I had to read it twice to believe it. He knew. He knew they were planning something. He was not just a passive enabler. He was a co-conspirator. He had stood there and lied to my face, telling me he was surprised, telling me it was just a joke. The betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. He had not just allowed them to humiliate me. He had consented to it. I showed the phone to Jessica. Her eyes widened and she let out a low whistle. She said, "I knew he was weak, but I did not think he was a willing participant. Sarah, I am so sorry." I did not want her pity. I did not have time for it. I was fueled by a white-hot rage. I scrolled further, looking for any mention of the honeymoon. And then I found it. A message from Chloe sent just that morning. It read, "The honeymoon surprise is all set. The booking is confirmed. She is going to be so shocked when she finds out where you are really taking her. Just wait for her face. It will be priceless." My blood ran cold. Where we were really taking her. What did that mean? We had booked a 2-week trip to a luxurious, all-inclusive resort in the Caribbean. We had spent months planning it. It was our dream honeymoon. Had he changed it? Had he canceled our plans without telling me? I quickly opened Mark's email app. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type his password. I found a folder labeled Travel. I opened it. At the top of the list was a booking confirmation from a budget motel chain. A motel located in a dreary, run-down tourist town a few hours' drive from our city. The reservation was for 2 weeks. It was for our honeymoon. I clicked on another email. It was a cancellation confirmation from the luxury resort we were supposed to be going to. It had been canceled a week ago. All of our dreams, all of our plans replaced with a cheap motel. This was their idea of a surprise. This was how they would put me in my place. By robbing me of the honeymoon I had helped pay for and planned with so much excitement. But that was not the worst of it. I found another email, a booking confirmation for the original luxury resort. But this one was not for us. It was for two people, Chloe and Helen. They had booked a suite at the exact same resort we were supposed to be at, for the exact same dates. They had used our canceled reservation to book their own trip. They were going to steal our honeymoon. The full picture slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. They were not just downgrading our trip. They were planning to be there, at the beautiful resort, while I was stuck in a cheap motel. They would be sending pictures, rubbing it in my face. Chloe's text suddenly made perfect, horrible sense. She will really know her place then. My place was in a rundown motel while they lived the life that should have been mine. And my husband, my partner, had arranged it all. He had stolen from me, lied to me, and conspired with his family to inflict the most cruel and humiliating punishment he could devise. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The tears were gone. The anger was still there, but it was no longer hot and chaotic. It was cold, sharp, and focused. I knew exactly what I had to do. This was not a marriage I could save. This was not a man I could trust. This was a declaration of war I could not ignore. I took screenshots of everything. The text messages between Mark and Chloe, the motel booking confirmation, the resort cancellation, the new booking for Chloe and Helen. I sent them all to my own phone and then to Jessica's, just for good measure. Then I went into Mark's message thread with Chloe and deleted the messages I had screenshotted. I did the same with the emails, moving them from his inbox to the trash folder. It was a small act of sabotage, a way to buy myself some time. He would not realize I knew until it was too late. I handed the phone back to Jessica. I said, "Put it back where you found it. Make sure it looks untouched." She nodded, her face grim. She said, "What are you going to do?" I looked at my reflection in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me was no longer a victim. She was a strategist. She was a survivor. I said, "I am going to continue playing my part. I am going to be the dutiful wife. I will go on this honeymoon. But they have made a very big mistake. They think I am weak. They think I am a pushover. They are about to find out just how wrong they are." My mind was already working, formulating a plan for revenge, a plan to reclaim my dignity and my money. They had built a perfect trap for me, but they had forgotten one important thing. Sometimes when you corner an animal, it does not cower. It bites back. And I was ready to bite. I walked out of the bridal suite with Jessica, my head held high. I found Mark hovering anxiously near the door. He rushed over to me, his face a mixture of relief and frustration. He said, "There you are. I was getting worried. Are you feeling better?" I gave him a small, fragile smile. It was the best performance of my life. I said, "Yes, I am sorry. I think it was just all the excitement." It overwhelmed me for a moment. He visibly relaxed. He believed me. He was so caught up in his own deception that he could not imagine I was capable of my own. He took my hand. He said, "I am glad you're okay. Come on, let us go cut the cake." I allowed him to lead me back to the center of the room, to the towering white cake that was supposed to symbolize our sweet new beginning. As we stood there, knife in hand, smiling for the cameras, I felt a chilling sense of detachment. I was watching a movie of my own life. The woman in the white dress was not me. She was a character I was playing. The real me was hidden deep inside, watching, waiting, and planning. The rest of the night was a series of carefully executed maneuvers. I laughed at the best man's speech. I thanked our guests for coming. I even managed a polite, distant smile for Helen when she came over to tell me how lovely the photo album was. I did not engage. I did not argue. I gave them nothing. My compliance seemed to please them. They thought they had won. They thought I had accepted my place. This was exactly what I wanted. When the reception finally wound down, Mark and I were sent off in a shower of rice and good wishes. We got into the waiting car, and as it pulled away from the venue, Mark let out a long sigh. He said, "Well, we survived." I just looked out the window at the dark streets flashing by. I said, "Yes, we did." He reached over and took my hand. He said, "Look, I am sorry about Chloe. I know she can be a lot, but she means well. And the album was a really sweet gesture, you have to admit." I turned to look at him. His face was earnest, his eyes pleading. He was trying to rewrite the narrative of the evening, to smooth over the cracks and pretend our foundation was solid. He had no idea it had already been demolished. I decided to test him, to see how far he would go with his lies. I said, "I am still a little worried about her honeymoon surprise. What did she get us?" He stiffened slightly, but recovered quickly. He smiled. He said, "Oh, you will love it. It is something really special. She put a lot of thought into it." I had to clench my jaw to keep from screaming. The audacity of his lies was breathtaking. He was going to keep up this charade until the very last moment. Until we were standing in the lobby of that disgusting motel. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. I said, "I cannot wait." The next day was a whirlwind of activity. We had a post-wedding brunch with our families. It was another masterclass in acting for me. I sat next to Mark, smiling and making small talk. I listened as Chloe and Helen talked endlessly about their upcoming girls' trip. They were careful not to mention where they were going, but they dropped hints about sunshine, beaches, and fancy cocktails. They kept looking at me, expecting a reaction. I gave them none. I just sipped my orange juice and offered a bland, "That sounds nice." My parents were quiet and watchful. My mother kept trying to catch my eye, a worried frown on her face. I knew she wanted to talk, to ask me if I was really okay. But I could not talk to her yet. I could not risk breaking down. I had to maintain this facade until my plan was in place. After the brunch, Mark and I went back to our new apartment to pack for our honeymoon. He was in high spirits, humming to himself as he folded his clothes. He seemed to think he had gotten away with it. He thought my quietness was submission. I packed my own suitcase, my movements slow and deliberate. I packed for a luxury beach resort. Sundresses, swimsuits, sandals. I did not pack a single thing that would be appropriate for a cheap motel in a dreary town. It was a small act of defiance, a secret promise to myself that I would not end up where they intended me to be. While Mark was in the shower, I made my first move. I took out my laptop and opened my online banking page. Mark and I had set up a new joint account where we had deposited all the wedding gift money. It was a substantial amount. Enough for a down payment on a house. Enough for a fresh start. I looked at the recent transactions. There it was. A large wire transfer made a week ago. The recipient was a credit company. I did a quick search. It was the company that held Chloe's business loans. She had a failed online boutique that she had always claimed was a roaring success. It was all a lie. And Mark had used our wedding money from my family and friends, to bail her out. The evidence was clear. He had stolen from us to pay for his sister's mistakes. The downgrade of our honeymoon was not just an act of cruelty. It was a necessity. He had spent the money. My hands flew across the keyboard. I opened a new browser tab. I searched for a family law attorney in my city. I found one with excellent reviews who specialized in annulments. I filled out the contact form, requesting an urgent consultation. I explained the situation briefly, mentioning financial fraud and conspiracy. I hit send. Then I went back to the joint bank account. I looked at the remaining balance. I calculated exactly half of the original total, down to the last cent. My half. With a few clicks, I transferred that amount into my personal savings account, an account that Mark did not have access to. I then went a step further. I found the customer service number for the bank and called them. I reported that my debit card for the joint account had been stolen and that I suspected fraudulent activity. I requested that they put an immediate freeze on the account. All transactions, both incoming and outgoing, would be blocked until the issue was resolved. It was a bold move. Mark would find out eventually. But by the time he did, I would be long gone. And my money, would be safe. I closed my laptop just as Mark came out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist. He smiled at me. He said, "All packed and ready to go?" I smiled back, a genuine smile for the first time in 2 days. It was a smile of satisfaction, a smile of impending victory. I said, "Absolutely. I cannot wait for our special honeymoon." He had no idea what kind of surprise I had in store for him. The morning of our departure, the atmosphere in the apartment was thick with a strange, tense energy. Mark was practically bouncing with excitement, a stark contrast to my own coiled stillness. He talked incessantly about the trip, painting a picture of a romantic getaway that he knew was a complete fabrication. He talked about the long walks on the beach we would take, the fancy dinners we would have, the beautiful sunsets we would watch. Each word was another twist of the knife, another reminder of the depth of his betrayal. I played along, my voice light and airy. I said, "It sounds absolutely perfect. I have been dreaming of this." My agreement seemed to fuel his confidence. He thought I was completely in the dark, a naive little bride ready to be led to her doom. He had no idea that I was the one holding all the cards. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from the lawyer's office. They could see me that afternoon. My heart leaped. The first piece of my plan was falling into place. I told Mark I needed to run a quick errand to pick up some last-minute travel essentials. He did not question it. He just told me not to be long, that our flight was that evening. Of course, there was no flight. There was only a long, miserable drive ahead of him. I met the lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Susan, in her downtown office. The room was clean and professional, and it made me feel a sense of control that I had been desperately lacking. I laid out the whole story, from the DJ's announcement to the stolen honeymoon. I showed her the screenshots on my phone, the texts, the bank transfers, the booking confirmations. Susan listened patiently, her expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence I presented. When I was finished, she looked at me, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. She said, "You have done an excellent job of documenting everything. This is a very clear case of fraud. An annulment should not be a problem at all. In fact, given that he used joint wedding funds for his sister's personal debt without your consent, you may even have grounds for criminal charges if you choose to pursue them." The words "criminal charges" hung in the air. For a moment, I considered it. I thought about the humiliation, the lies, the sheer malice of their actions. They probably deserved it, but I did not want a long, messy legal battle. I just wanted out. I wanted to be free of them. I said, "For now, I just want the annulment. I want this marriage to be erased, like it never happened. And I want to make sure he cannot touch any more of my money." Susan nodded. She said, "We can file the papers immediately, and the freeze you put on the joint account was a very smart move. We will make sure that is formalized. He will not be able to access a single penny of what is left until this is settled in court." I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. It was really happening. I was taking back control of my life. I signed the necessary paperwork, my hand steady. I paid her retainer from my personal account. As I left her office, I felt a sense of empowerment I had not felt in days. I was not just reacting anymore. I was acting. My next stop was the bank. I went in person to finalize the freeze on the joint account and to ensure my personal accounts were secure. I spoke with the branch manager, a kind woman who listened to my story with a sympathetic ear. She assured me that my funds were safe and that Mark would not be able to access the joint account under any circumstances. She gave me her direct number in case I had any more problems. My final errand was the most satisfying. I took a taxi to the travel agency we had originally used to book our dream honeymoon. I walked in and spoke to the agent who had helped us. I explained that my husband had canceled our trip, but that I would like to rebook it. For one person. The agent was confused but professional. She found the reservation in the system. She said, "Yes, your husband did cancel, but it looks like his sister rebooked a suite for the same dates right after." I smiled. I said, "I know. Is there any availability at all? A room, a suite, anything?" She typed on her computer for a few minutes. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up, a smile on her face. She said, "You're in luck. There was a last-minute cancellation this morning for the presidential suite. It is the best room in the resort. It is available for your entire 2-week stay." It was perfect. It was more than perfect. It was poetic justice. The presidential suite. I could just imagine the look on Chloe's face when she found out I was staying in a room far superior to hers. I did not hesitate. I said, "I will take it." I paid for the entire trip using my own credit card. I had the money. I had my half of the wedding gifts, and I had my own savings. This was not an expense. It was an investment in my own happiness and sanity. I walked out of the travel agency with a new set of tickets in my name only, a confirmation for the best room in the house, and a plan for the final act of my revenge. When I got back to the apartment, Mark was pacing impatiently. He said, "Where have you been? We need to leave for the airport soon." I put on my best apologetic face. I said, "I am so sorry, I lost track of time. I am all ready to go." We loaded our suitcases into his car, my suitcase filled with beachwear, his suitcase filled with clothes for a trip he was not going to take. The drive to the airport was quiet. I could feel his excitement, his anticipation of my impending disappointment. He thought he was so clever. He did not drive toward the international airport. He drove toward the domestic one, the smaller hub used for short-haul flights. This was part of his elaborate lie. He was going to pretend we were taking a small connecting flight. We pulled into the parking garage. He turned off the engine and turned to me, a smug smile on his face. He said, "Okay, are you ready for your big honeymoon surprise?" This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he thought he would finally break me. I smiled back at him, a wide, genuine smile. I said, "I think you are the one who is in for a surprise, Mark." His smile faltered. He said, "What do you mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the legal documents Susan had given me, the annulment papers. I placed them on the dashboard in front of him. His eyes widened in confusion. He picked them up, his hands shaking slightly as he read the first page. I said, "Our marriage is over, Mark. I know everything." His face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He said, "What? What are you talking about? I do not understand." I leaned back in my seat, enjoying the moment. I said, "I know about the motel. I know you canceled our real honeymoon. I know you gave our wedding money to Chloe to pay off her debts. I know you and your mother and sister planned to humiliate me from the very beginning. I know about the texts. I know everything." He stared at me, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. The smugness was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He said, "Sarah, I can explain." I held up a hand to stop him. I said, "No, you cannot. There is no explanation for what you did. You did not just lie to me. You stole from me. You conspired against me with your family. You are not the man I thought you were." Tears started to well up in his eyes. He said, "Please, Sarah, do not do this. It was a mistake. I love you." The words felt like ash in my mouth. I said, "No, you do not. You love keeping the peace with your sister. You love avoiding confrontation. You do not love me. If you did, you never would have let them treat me this way. You never would have participated in it." I opened my car door. I said, The joint bank account is frozen. My lawyer has been in contact. You will be hearing from her soon. I got out of the car and walked to the back to get my suitcase. He scrambled out of the driver's side, his face a mess of tears and desperation. He followed me. He said, "Where are you going? What are you going to do?" I slammed the trunk shut and turned to face him one last time. I pulled the plane ticket out of my purse, the one with my name on it, for a flight to the Caribbean, leaving in 2 hours. I held it up for him to see. I said, "I am going on our honeymoon. The real one. The one I paid for myself with my own money. I am going to stay in the presidential suite. And you?" I pointed a finger at him. "You can go to that cheap motel. You can explain to Chloe and Helen why your plan failed so spectacularly." His face crumpled. The full weight of his actions, the full scope of the consequences, finally seemed to hit him. He had lost everything. His wife, his money, his carefully constructed lies. I did not feel a shred of pity for him. I just felt a profound sense of relief. I was free. I turned and walked away, pulling my suitcase behind me. I did not look back. I walked into the airport, through security, and toward my gate. With every step, I felt lighter. I was leaving behind the toxicity, the manipulation, the betrayal. I was walking toward the sunshine. I was walking toward my new life. A life that I would build for myself, on my own terms. The wedding was a disaster. The marriage was a sham. But the honeymoon, I decided, was going to be absolutely perfect. The flight was long, but I did not mind. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe. I watched the clouds drift by outside my window and felt the knot of tension in my shoulders begin to unwind. I did not think about Mark. I did not think about Chloe or Helen. I thought about the future. My future. It was a blank canvas, and for the first time, I was the only one holding the paintbrush. When I landed in the Caribbean, the warm, humid air felt like a welcoming embrace. I took a taxi to the resort, a sprawling paradise of palm trees, white sand beaches, and crystal clear water. It was even more beautiful than the pictures. As I checked in, the receptionist smiled at me. She said, "Welcome, miss. We have you in the presidential suite. It has the best view in the resort." I smiled back. I said, "I am sure it does." The suite was breathtaking. It was larger than my old apartment. It had a huge living area, a massive bedroom with a 4-poster bed, and a private balcony with its own infinity pool overlooking the ocean. It was the pinnacle of luxury. And it was all mine. I spent the first few days in a state of blissful solitude. I slept in late. I ordered room service. I read books by my private pool. I walked along the beach, letting the waves wash over my feet. I was healing. I was reclaiming the peace that had been stolen from me. On the third day, I was lying on a lounge chair by the main resort pool when I saw them. Chloe and Helen. They were walking toward the pool bar, dressed in expensive designer swimwear, their faces set in grim, angry lines. They had clearly not been having the luxurious, triumphant vacation they had planned. Chloe saw me first. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure hatred. She grabbed her mother's arm and pointed at me. Helen's head whipped around. Her jaw dropped. They both stared at me as if they had seen a ghost. I did not run. I did not hide. I sat up a little straighter, took a slow sip of my cocktail, and gave them a small, polite wave. It was a simple gesture, but it was a declaration of victory. I was here. I was thriving. And I was in a place they could never reach. Chloe stormed over to my lounge chair, her mother trailing behind her like a shadow. She stood over me, her body tense with rage. She said, "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be in that motel." I looked up at her, my expression calm and untroubled. I said, "Plans change." Helen stepped forward. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. She said, "Where is my son? What have you done with him?" I took another sip of my drink before answering. I said, Mark is exactly where he deserves to be, dealing with the consequences of his actions. I believe he is enjoying a lovely 2-week stay at the Seabreeze Motel. You should send him a postcard. Chloe's face turned an ugly shade of red. She said, "You ruined everything. This was all your fault." I almost laughed. The sheer audacity of her victimhood was astounding. I said, "My fault?" Let me be very clear, Chloe. You did this. You and your mother, with your petty games and your malicious plans. You pushed me and you kept pushing because you thought I was weak. You thought you could bully me into submission, but you underestimated me. And you overestimated your hold on your brother. Helen sputtered. Mark would never choose you over his family. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile. I said, "You are right. He did not choose me. He chose you, and in doing so, he lost me. And he lost his access to our joint bank account, which I had frozen due to fraudulent activity. The fraudulent activity being him stealing our wedding money to pay off your daughter's massive debts." Helen's face went white. She looked at Chloe, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Chloe refused to meet her gaze. She knew I had her cornered. I decided to deliver the final blow. I stood up, wrapping my sarong around my waist. I looked from Chloe to Helen. I said, "I have filed for an annulment. By the time I get back home, I will hopefully no longer be a part of your wonderful family. So you see, you got what you wanted. You got Mark all to yourself. I hope you will be very happy together. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a massage appointment. In the presidential suite. It has a lovely view. You should try to get a glimpse of it on your way back to your standard room." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, speechless and defeated. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could feel their humiliation radiating off them like heat. It was a petty, satisfying victory. But it was not the end of the story. The real victory would be building a life for myself that was so happy and so successful that they would become nothing more than a bad memory. The rest of my vacation was a dream. I explored the island. I went snorkeling. I ate at amazing restaurants. I met new people. For the first time, I felt truly independent. I was not Mark's wife or Chloe's victim. I was just Sarah. And I was starting to like her very much. When I returned home, I felt like a new person. The apartment I had once shared with Mark felt empty, but not in a sad way. It felt clean. It felt full of possibility. There was a pile of mail on the floor. Among the bills and junk mail was a thick envelope from Susan's office. I opened it. The annulment had been granted. It was official. The marriage had been legally erased. I was a free woman. There was also a letter from Mark. It was a long, rambling, pathetic plea for forgiveness. He wrote about how sorry he was, how he had been manipulated by his sister, how he had made a terrible mistake. He begged me to take him back, promising that things would be different. I read the letter, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of indifference. He was a stranger to me now. I tore the letter into tiny pieces and threw it in the trash. A few weeks later, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. It was Mark's cousin, a quiet, kind woman named Laura who had always been friendly to me. She sounded hesitant, nervous. She said, "Sarah? It is Laura. I hope you do not mind me calling." I said, "Not at all, Laura. It is good to hear from you. Is everything okay?" She sighed. She said, "Not really. Things have been chaotic since the wedding. I just wanted to call and apologize. I saw how Chloe and my Aunt Helen were treating you, and I should have said something. I was a coward, and I am sorry." Her apology was unexpected, and it meant more to me than she could ever know. I said, "Thank you, Laura. That really means a lot to me." She continued, "I also thought you should know what has been happening. Mark is a complete mess. He moved back in with Helen, and all they do is fight. Helen is furious with Chloe. She found out the full extent of her debts and the lies she told about her business. She cut her off completely. Chloe had to sell her car and move into a tiny apartment. She and Mark are not even speaking. So their perfect little family unit had imploded. The moment their common enemy, me, was gone, they had turned on each other. It was a predictable but satisfying outcome. Laura said, Mark tried to get money from the joint account, but he could not. He is blaming you for everything, of course. But some of us in the family, we know the truth. We know what they did, and we are on your side. I thanked her again for her call. It was good to know that not everyone in that family was toxic. It was good to know that the truth had come out. I sold the apartment and found a new place on my own, in a different part of the city. I reconnected with my friends and family, who had been my unwavering support system through the whole ordeal. I focused on my career and I got a promotion at work. My life was moving forward. One day, about a year later, I was having coffee with Jessica at a cafe downtown. We were laughing about something when I saw him. Mark. He was walking down the street looking thin and tired. His clothes were rumpled. He looked lost. He did not see me. He walked right past the window, a ghost from a life I had almost lived. Jessica saw him too. She said, "Wow, he looks terrible." I just shrugged. I said, "That is a shame." And I meant it. It was a shame that he had thrown away his chance at happiness. It was a shame that he had allowed his family's toxicity to poison his life. But it was not my shame. It was not my problem. I took a sip of my coffee and turned my attention back to my friend. The sun was shining. My life was good. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal. And I had not only survived, but I had triumphed. I had learned that my own strength was more than enough. I had learned that I deserved respect, honesty, and true partnership. And I had learned that I would never, ever settle for anything less. The memory of the DJ's voice, the image of Chloe stepping onto the dance floor, it no longer had the power to hurt me. It was just a reminder of the day I stopped being a victim and started being the hero of my own story. And my story was just beginning. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. I found joy in the small things, decorating my new apartment, trying new recipes, taking weekend trips with Jessica. The drama with Mark and his family faded into the background like a bad dream that loses its power in the light of day. The legal proceedings wrapped up cleanly. The joint account was officially dissolved and the remaining funds were split. My half went directly into a high-yield savings account I had opened, a nest egg for my future. I never heard from Mark or his family directly again, and for that, I was profoundly grateful. One evening, I was scrolling through social media, a mindless habit I had picked up. Out of a strange, detached curiosity, I searched for Chloe's name. Her profile, which had once been a carefully curated feed of luxury, success, and smug pronouncements, was now private. But her failed online boutiques page was still public. It was a digital graveyard filled with old posts and unanswered customer complaints. The most recent comments were from angry people demanding refunds for orders that were never shipped. It was a pathetic monument to her lies. She had not just failed in business. She had failed in character, and now the whole world could see it. A few months after that, I ran into Laura, Mark's cousin, at a grocery store. She looked relieved to see me. We chatted for a few minutes, the conversation polite and a little awkward at first. Then she lowered her voice. She said, "I probably should not be telling you this, but Helen is selling the family home. Things got so bad with Mark and Chloe both living there, constantly fighting about money. She said she needed to escape them both." I must have looked surprised because she continued, "Chloe is working as a cashier at a discount store now. And Mark, he is still just adrift. He cannot seem to hold down a job. He blames everyone but himself. It is all very sad." Sad. Yes, it was sad. It was a sad, pathetic waste of a life. But it was a sadness born from their own choices, a fire they had kindled themselves. I felt a distant, clinical sort of pity. The same kind you might feel for a character in a book whose downfall was entirely predictable. I wished her well, and went on with my shopping, the encounter leaving only the faintest ripple in the calm waters of my new life. My promotion at work came with more responsibility and a significant raise. I was good at my job, and it felt good to be recognized for my skills and hard work. I started saving aggressively, not just for a house, but for my own independence. I never wanted to be in a position again where my financial security was tied to someone else. Jessica and I took a trip to Europe a year after my ill-fated wedding. We went to Paris and Rome, ate amazing food, saw incredible art, and made wonderful memories. On our last night in Rome, we were sitting at a small cafe, drinking wine and watching the people go by. Jessica raised her glass. She said, "To you, Sarah, to the strongest person I know. You took the worst thing that could happen and turned it into the best thing that ever happened to you." I clinked my glass against hers. I said, "I could not have done it without you." And it was true. Her unwavering support had been my anchor in the storm. When I got back from Europe, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to start volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping women who were leaving abusive or difficult situations. I shared my story, not the gory details, but the story of my recovery. The story of how I found my strength and rebuilt my life. It was empowering to help others, to show them that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, that they too could be the heroes of their own stories. 2 years after the wedding, I met someone. His name was David. We met through a mutual friend at a dinner party. He was kind, funny, and intelligent. He was a good listener. And most importantly, he was honest. Our courtship was slow and steady. There were no grand, dramatic gestures. There was just a quiet, growing sense of trust and mutual respect. He knew about my past. I had told him the whole story, not for sympathy, but because I believed that honesty was the only foundation on which to build a real relationship. He did not flinch. He did not judge. He just listened, and when I was done, he said, "I am so sorry you went through that, but I am not Mark. And I will spend the rest of our lives, if you will let me, proving that to you." And he did. He was a true partner. He celebrated my successes. He supported me in my challenges. He respected my independence. He met my family and charmed them completely. My father, who had been so wary of me dating again, pulled me aside after meeting David and said, "That one, he is a good man. He looks at you like you are the only person in the world." When David proposed a year later, it was not a surprise. It was a natural, beautiful progression of our love. He did it quietly, on a Tuesday night, in the kitchen of the house we had just bought together. There was no audience. There was no performance. There was just him on one knee with a simple, elegant ring, promising to be my partner, my equal in all things. I said yes without a moment's hesitation. Our wedding was the complete opposite of my first one. It was small and intimate, with just our closest family and friends. We got married in the backyard of our new home. There was no DJ, just a playlist of our favorite songs. There were no grand pronouncements, just heartfelt, personal vows that we had written for each other. It was a day filled with genuine love and quiet joy. As I stood there, holding David's hands, looking into his kind, honest eyes, I thought for a fleeting moment about that other wedding. I thought about the woman I had been then, so full of naive hope, so blind to the darkness that was right in front of her. I did not feel regret. I did not feel anger. I just felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons I had learned. Gratitude for the strength I had discovered within myself. And gratitude for the winding, difficult path that had, against all odds, led me to this perfect moment of happiness. My past was a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. The ghosts of Mark and Chloe and Helen were finally laid to rest. They were nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of what I had overcome. My real life, my true life, was just beginning. And as my new husband, my true love, leaned in to kiss me, I knew, with a certainty that filled my entire being, that this time it was going to be a beautiful story. A story of love, of resilience, and of a happiness that I had not just been given, but had earned for myself. And it was a story I could not wait to write.